Hi everyone, as we've already heard, I'm Peter Middleton. I run the North American business for a Finnish software company called Comptel. I guess a lot of you associate the name Comptel with a company that runs exhibitions in the telco space, but they changed their name. They blinked first. So we're a Finnish company. We have about 300 customers around the world, including a very large carrier over here in North America that likes to make a lot of noise, T-Mobile. They're one of our key customers over here. I recently moved to Texas about 9 months ago, and I think I'm almost becoming a Texan. My final test is this Friday, when I go to my first Friday Night Lights game, and I have to use the expression "you all" in all 15 contexts in which it can be delivered. So that should be quite interesting for everybody, I think. Today, we want to talk about why happy customers can actually mean happy business for everybody. We're going to talk about that in the context of sponsored data and some work that we've done with a very large service provider, Orange, or France Telecom as they used to be called. Everyone has to have a trendy name now. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how data gets used in a different way and data gets consumed in a different way and what's driving some of the things that actually sit behind that. But first of all, a little bit about Comptel. So Comptel, every day, we refine about 20% of the world's mobile usage data. Our customers, our 300 customers, who include customers like Bharti, Airtel in India, where they have 20 billion events across their network, across India and Africa every day. What does that actually mean in real terms? Well, we're trying to talk about what real terms actually mean today. That actually means that everyday Comptel software processes more data than Twitter. It's quite an incredible figure. And when we figured that one out, it was something that we all challenged internally, but apparently it is very true. Our customers actually serve 2 billion end customers worldwide. So that's a little bit about the credibility that we have. Our customers include people like Vodafone, Telefonica, Deutsche Telekom, and of course our friends T-Mobile over in Seattle. So that's a little bit about us as an organization. What I want to talk about today is the reality of what we have here, which is a very disruptive environment in which telcos are having to operate today. And how can we use that as a moment of truth to actually help to get closer to the customer? And one of the ways of doing that is to think about what's a new way for customers to actually start to consume data. And you'll see the badge that we all wear here, which talks about the customer and customers. I think we spent a lot of time segmenting customers into big groups, into hundreds and thousands and sometimes millions in those particular groups. As an individual, I want to be treated as a customer, not as a group of customers. I want to be treated as an individual. And how can we start to think about how do we actually progress that and how do we pull that together? Then we want to talk about what we think is our Win3 model, which is a win for everybody that's involved in this transaction. And then I'll talk a little bit about the TM Forum Catalyst and how that was put together. There is one architecture slide in this presentation. The rest of it is pictures. I can assure you that I'm not a reformed network architect. Well, actually I am. That was a long time ago. But it's one architecture. And every time there's more than one architecture slide in one of our presentations, Miko kills a unicorn. So what are those external disruptors? This is not meant to be a motherhood and apple pie type presentations. We've all seen those guys that are actually, those logos on there, they're actually disrupting the whole industry. They're setting expectations amongst the millennials, and they're setting expectations across all of us who have to deal with that in every way. An example of that now, Amazon's really good at the whole customer experience thing. And most of the people that are buying services now expect to get that Amazon level of service from everything that they do, whether that's buying a car or whether it's actually buying a telco service. That's what people expect now. And we have to think about the disruption that's actually caused and what that actually means in terms of customer experience, what it means in terms of lowering transactional costs for everybody, and what it means in terms of being able to put products together and bring things faster to market, which is what it's the holy grail we're all looking for. The real overriding part of this is that mobile first. Gartner did a study just about 6 months ago that said by 2018, almost 50% of all internet traffic will actually be derived from mobile devices, so smartphones and tablets. That's an incredible amount of data that suddenly is being used in a different context. Why are people using mobile? Well, it's more convenient, and it's the power of now. We want that service now, so how do we actually start thinking about how we do that, and how do we deliver that to customers, and how do customers actually consume that data? This guy, Frederick Youngerman, is someone who is pretty well known in Europe as someone who studied telcos over about 20 years. And we asked him, has data monetization reached perfection? In other words, the way that we sell data to customers, has that actually reached perfection? And we've heard an awful lot about, why do customers buy gigabytes? And we've heard lots of people say, yeah, well, people don't understand what gigabytes are, and why don't we do it in a different way? That's okay for some, but this model isn't broken. It's not finished yet. Selling data by gigabytes is fine. It's not actually broken. Let's be clear about that. But we do need to think about how do we bring in more people so that they understand what it is that they're actually trying to put together. So the question is, how many HD quality movies can you actually watch with 3 GB of data? And do you care about that? We saw a great presentation from our friend from TELUS where, if you approach your data limit, so you're kind of 3/4 of the way through your HD movie, you get a pop-up that says, hey, do you want to buy some more? That's good. What about if the fact that you used that you actually watched that movie and you watched it in a way that meant there was no danger of you going over that, and the telco was happy about that because he or she was being paid by the content provider to allow that to happen. Now we've seen that. We've seen a lot of sponsored data pieces that are actually out there in various ways, and there's a whole lot of issues that we have to consider when that's actually going on. So anybody know how many HD quality movies you can watch with 3 gig? Any experts in here? Nah. If you're using Real HD, then it's going to be about 3/4 of a movie. Now, next question. A virtual reality session. Anybody know how much data that uses? It uses 20 times as much data as a regular video session. So think about what that actually means when people start messing about with virtual reality. Fantastic experience. The whole kind of Mobile World Congress this year was all about virtual reality. Some fantastic immersive experiences there. You can walk along the beach that you're going to lie on when you go on your vacation and do all sorts of other wacky things. But the reality is that's a huge amount of data. And how long are unlimited data plans going to be able to sustain that? So we need to think of a new revenue model for telcos to actually start to generate some revenue from that sort of scenario. We've seen some of that already. We've seen our friends at T-Mobile doing the whole binge-on piece where they have a queue of app providers who all want to be part of binge-on because it doesn't count against your data traffic, does it? Or does it? So the question you then have to ask is, if we start doing that, and if we look at AT&T's data perks and the kind of sponsored data there, does that, and the regulator is already starting to look into this and hammering in on some of these organizations and saying, are you impinging on net neutrality? Are you prioritizing this traffic differently? Are you forcing people to do things in a different way? So the whole net neutrality debate around this is not yet finished, but the reality is that sponsored data is here to stay. It's the future. It's the way that the telcos are going to generate, some revenue from having these kind of unlimited data plans. It's the way that a lot of people are actually going to start to generate information from, so customers are actually going to realize that they can, just for maybe watching an advert or going to one particular site, they are able to watch their HD movies without worrying about their data allowance. So it's a win-win for everyone. How about this, though? This is quite an interesting slide. We talked earlier just about the power of the thumb. But if you're a content provider and you want to start using a telco, and my apologies to anybody from Verizon who's sitting here in the room, maybe this was the easiest one to pull off. But to do that, I have to fill in a form, and then someone calls me and I have to have a dialogue. That's a long way away from what we're trying to encourage here, that consumption is made easy. It's actually suddenly very, very hard. Oh gosh, I'm Joe who wants to just do some sponsored data for people that walk down this particular street. I've got to have a dialogue. I've got to do all of those things. That's not the way the world works. So we were presented with a challenge by one of our customers to say, how can you actually help us with that? We've got a terrific amount of your technology in there. How can you actually help us to onboard that? And we thought about the best way of doing that is to kind of think about what are telcos actually looking for, and what are customers actually looking for? And when we do that, we see this kind of everybody winning in their sponsored data. So if you can onboard people very, very easily, if you take the content provider, so we'll go from right to left, what are the benefits for him? He gets more content users. He has a carrier customer base to market to, so he has a very contained user base that he can actually push towards. He can cooperate with the carrier, and his brand can become associated with that. Now, when you think about how fast some of these brands actually build these days, then having the ability to market into a carrier's user base is tremendous for those brands that have got a specific niche that they want to target. The carrier wins because he has happier customers. They're not worried about their data plans and going over it. But he also secures his revenue because he's suddenly not thinking, well, if I have an unlimited data plan, how do I make money? So the CFO isn't going to be knocking on the door and saying, how do I do that? He's getting paid by the content provider. And the customer, of course, the most important person in this, he's able to use his mobile device to get access to all of the content that he needs. His data quota remains intact for other things that he wants to do, and his customer experience is fantastic. So what does that mean inside of a carrier? We asked the carrier about what does that actually mean for you? And we heard earlier about DevOps and how things are actually moving along and how people are actually beginning to think about what's the most efficient way of actually doing that. Well, when carriers start to analyze the data that they're actually getting, what they see is the 4 key areas that they use to kind of monetize and think about what they're actually doing. The first thing that they want to use the data that they get from the network about and the data that they get on customer information is, how do I actually make this the operational efficiency? How do I increase operational efficiency? Then they start to look at how can I maximize that? How can I contextually market things into that part of my user base? Then they start to think about how can I improve my existing services? And only finally at the very end do they think, how can I get new businesses? How can I start to think about new businesses? So that's the data flow, data that's actually there and available to the customer. That's what our customers tell us that they use it for. So how did we do that? Well, we work with Salesforce. We're a Salesforce partner, and this will be demonstrated again at Dreamforce if any of you are going to San Francisco for the bun fight that is Dreamforce. We used our products, Fastermind and Monetizer, which are our charging and data refinery products. We actually worked with Orange, and we worked with a couple of other providers to provide product catalogs and other things like that. We were actually able to allow a content provider to simply go straight in and start to build his content and build his sponsored data package. The carrier was protected because he had the configure price quote engine, which had all of his rules in it. The customer was protected because they accessed that information and it simply did not come from their data package. So this worked really well. And in fact, we won an award from the Telemanagement Forum for the most innovative catalyst. And that was pretty cool from the perspective of, we started this and we did all of this in about, I think 45 days was what we actually ended up doing it in. And we're able to demonstrate this and implement it in a real world scenario. So this does actually work. This is not smoke and mirrors. This can actually work in the real world. So what does that actually mean? It means that the sponsored data can actually solve a lot of the customer challenges that are actually in there. Customers can consume data-hungry video as much as they actually want. You can instantly get customers on board and content providers on board without having to go through a huge dialogue and a very high cost of sale. And you end up with very much personalized data monetization. The customer feels that he's got something that is his, that he is able to control. And that's very, very, very important. One final thing that we just talk about here is that another innovation that we've put together, we talked about different ways of consuming data. This app that we've built and that we've been very successful in some of the prepaid and second and third world parts of the earth is very much something that is the new way of consuming data. So how about consuming data? I want to buy 10 minutes of Facebook. I want to buy 5 minutes of Skype. I want to buy 25 minutes of email. That's a new way of actually doing it. And people, again, want to control that from their device. So that's something else that we've done to help customers consume data in a different way. What that means is that we believe we've provided infrastructure in many ways to allow happy customers. And that actually means for many of our service provider customers they're seeing a lot more business, and that makes them happy. Thank you for your attention. We've got time for questions. I'm sure we'll get some. Yep, fire away. Mm-hmm.
And one of the challenges we've been seeing has been, I would say from our perspective, the unrealistic expectations that carriers have for the price of their data. Because they expect to get full retail pricing per gigabyte. When you typical content providers, they look at you that you basically come from another planet. So how are you addressing that, or how are your customers addressing the challenge that we are seeing in the marketplace response to data?
So first of all, I wholeheartedly agree with you. We've seen that ourselves. We've seen exactly that same situation. But the reality is that you have to start building the business case to prove that that data is actually, that customers will actually, rather than shop around and perhaps change to another provider and churn, if you can use that as a loyalty tool to some of your customers, that's another way of segmenting it and saying, I'll tell you what I'll do, here's a loyalty piece that we'll actually do with that. So we've seen that approach working, but it is an issue, and we get into that debate all the time. Yes?
You talk a lot about business use cases. Is Comptel doing anything on the security side to offer security applications, fraud detection, things like that?
We'd work with partners to do that. That's not an area that we actually get directly involved with. Typically, we're part of an ecosystem that includes security that is a wrap on top of what we're actually doing. We're the piece in the middle that's actually constructing the offer, if you will, to go out to the customer and using that data for that. That's it. My work is done. Thank you very much.
Our panel here is on virtualization and its impact on big data and analytics. So let's start just with some brief introductions, if we could. We'll run down the line here. A little bit about just a quick intro, a little bit about yourself, your company.
Sure. John English with NetScout Systems. NetScout has really three lines of business that we're pursuing now. Traditionally, service assurance, big data analytics, and cyber threat security.
Great.
Alex Rootham with TELUS, we're a Canadian telecom company focused on government. And I'm Arsenault. I work for Time Warner Cable, now part of HR.
Okay. So let's jump in. Let's sort of level set, I think. Talk a little bit about the impact of virtualization in telecom. It impacts both big data processing that we're talking about today, as well as the network itself with network function virtualization. So go down the line here. Just give me your thoughts on the big picture impact it's going to have in telecom, and maybe the timing, right? Because we're definitely seeing some operators moving very quickly. We're also seeing a lot of slideware, right? So maybe just big picture and then some timing thoughts. Yeah, let's go just down the line.
So I think service providers are intending to and purposefully disrupting themselves. Their operations, their network, the way they deliver services, and I think they have to do that to meet the challenges of their existing competitors, but also to meet the challenges from the new array of competitors, the Amazons, the Googles, the Netflix, Facebook. It's never more important for them to understand customer behavior and learn to monetize that to meet those challenges. In the engagements that we're involved with virtualization and big data, but I'll keep on virtualization for a moment here, we're finding that it's dramatically increasing the complexity of the network. And virtualization is bringing a lot of great things. If a process is failing, you can spin up a new process, spin down a new process. But from a service assurance perspective, it's kind of like watching whack-a-mole. What's going to happen with the signaling and the user plane while these processes are going up and down? And so a lot of the engagements, and this is understandable with new technology, are really in the lab and early field, first office type of applications. And so I think it's a natural part of the process. I don't think there's any question that virtualization is coming. It's not going to stop. And every single customer that we're working with either has a program or they're looking into it.
Okay, so now we have two service providers. I'd love Alex to get a bit of a thought on where virtualization and software-defined networking sort of stands within TELUS, and then maybe what the impact would be, right? So how does it change how you deliver services?
Certainly. So I think SDA and NFE, they are definitely a big deal. If you're, visiting downstairs, you hear quite a bit about 5G, and underpinning a lot of what 5G is about, the network slicing that they're talking about doing, and software-defined networks and NFE to be able to enable that. So it is a big deal, and I guess I echo that it's a complicated deal too. If you're going to be slicing and dicing networks into much smaller pieces, you have to be able to operate those networks and to be able to support your customers, make sure those networks don't fail. The traditional model where you would have a human respond to issues, that doesn't scale either. You can't have 30,000 TELUS operations teams running around, each operating their own network. You've got to be able to get machines to be able to analyze what's going on in those networks and come back. So I think there's definitely a strong role to play for big data and data analytics within SDN and NFE.
Yeah, so you mentioned the term network slicing, right? So can you explain what that means and what the context of what the impact will be on next generation sort of service delivery, right? How does it change how an operator like yourself delivers services and thinks about services?
So I guess the last presentation we saw was you want individual customer experience. Maybe the final destination of that is, what if every individual had their own telco, right? With the entire stack from a radio access network providing them access wherever they are, all the way up through core network, all the way up to billing and charging systems and through the IT layers as well. Imagine if on a single computer that they were carrying around in their pocket, they had a whole telco in their box, right? So telco in a box, maybe that's extreme, it's many years out, right? But that seems to be where we're going. So the slicing is you're slicing each telco into one telco for each customer, for each unit.
Okay, all right, so Joe, just give us your thoughts and early impact at Time Warner.
Yeah, so the impact on Time Warner, we were doing a lot of stuff in the last sort of 6 months or so pre-merger. Things have, obviously with the merger, things have put on hold, a lot of automation, a lot of activities have stopped. But we were focusing a lot on the automation part. What could we automate from the network, from the virtualization part, from how do we interact, how do we identify, coordinate, and then proactively respond to that issue, especially from a network perspective for issues that we might see that either impact the customer or impact the network. So it was a real spin up on how could we focus on automation from sort of the end-to-end solution to identifying the issue to proactively fixing it at the end.
Okay, so we've heard a little bit about sort of self-healing networks, right? A little bit about a more personalized approach to service delivery. John, can you talk a little bit about the idea of a more elastic bandwidth, right? I mean, I think this is one of the more interesting takes on it. If you look at a large cloud provider today, you're getting computing process or computing storage on demand. I mean, that's what the network begins to look like, right? Something that can be turned up a little bit more on demand, be more responsive, and not have a big overbuild to meet demand. Talk about the capabilities that virtualization and SDN brings in terms of enabling that and what a telco becomes when we can do something like that. Right?
Well, from our perspective, what it means is that you've got to have deeper resolution. You've got to be able to get visibility, not just at the pipe layer, but all the way down into the VNF process, right? Because that's what's going on when you talk about elasticity. You're spinning up, you're spinning down, and it's not just getting visibility down to the VNF level, it's doing it with the context of the service and the subscriber. And as the gentleman from TELUS is talking about, as you start to evolve towards slicing or community-based approaches, then you've really got to have that level of visibility so you're managing both those community telcos, if you will, but also these other cloud-based services.
Yeah, I wonder if the service providers could talk about that big picture or that reach goal, right? And what's the timing to reaching something like that? And again, how does it sort of change how you deliver services to your customer when you reach that end goal, right?
I guess two things. The first thing is you have that end goal, but every step along the way to that end goal provides incremental value, right? So it's not like you have to believe in a vision and then once you get there, then the benefits come. But at each step along the way, the more you're able to slice, the more you're able to virtualize, you get benefits. both externally as well as internally, it just becomes more convenient for operators to be able to do their regular day-to-day business if they're able to do that stuff easily. The other thing is in speaking with our customers and maybe speaking with their feet, stay with me. If they see bad quality, they vote with their feet and they leave. And we've noticed that an over-centralized approach tends to leave you susceptible to larger events disrupting an entire customer's experience. One of the main benefits of being able to slice is to improve quality, just because singular events can't take down your whole network.
Yeah. And Joe, I mean, that sort of step approach to implementing this, getting value out of this process every step along the way is good, because if you get that big picture transformation, it never really happens, right? Is that something you've seen, and is that an approach that Time Warner's taking to sort of very pragmatically go
Yeah,
about this?
we're addressing certain layers of the infrastructure, moving our way up the chain in terms of the automation or virtualization aspects, and we've seen some really big benefits. We've also seen some drawbacks too, in terms of where we've seen things that maybe not worked out as well as we want them to, and then how do we scale back or scale up or scale differently in terms of, sometimes you get too much, and can you handle too much of whatever is being, virtualized or produced or automated, and then how does that impact the overall system? So we've had some step back, I guess, is the comment earlier. A step back approach to say that, in certain aspects it didn't work out as well as we wanted, and we had to readdress a solution or an opportunity that we thought we gained a lot of value and a lot of reduced operational cost. And I think eventually it's all about, at least from my perspective, it's all about reducing operational costs and increasing reliability and efficiency.
Yeah, John, as a network vendor, can you talk a little bit about or share how you move what have been formerly hardware and software products into a virtualized environment? Maybe share some of the products you've done that with, and how telcos respond, deployment times, those sorts of things, costs even. Sure. I mean, I don't want to pin you down, but that process of evolution would be interesting, I think, to look at.
So the move to virtualization has been somewhat easier for NetScout because we've had virtual agents for some years now, and we build our software really independent of hardware. So it's been an easier progression from a product development perspective. We provide solutions that look at both physical and virtual networks with one seamless single data set, the same application. So we're really trying to minimize the disruption from a service assurance perspective as the carriers incorporate virtual elements. And I think what's interesting for us is we really focus on performance and total cost of ownership. And this is a point that's, I think, generic across all virtualized solutions, and that is, I think there's a misperception out there that hardware is free, that you just get it for free. Well, COTS is certainly cheaper, but it ain't free. And so if your virtualized solution is not optimized for the hardware footprint, then you're going to end up paying a lot more for your total solution. That is what you pay for the virtualized elements and then what you have to pay for the hardware service to support it.
Yeah. I've talked to NetScout before. It sort of changes some of the architectures that you deploy as well, right? When you're just deploying software probes versus hardware probes. I mean, is it change how the network is managed? I think it's an interesting question, and I imagine it's very dependent on different network operators, right? How they approach the issue.
Yeah, so I mean, we're going forward with a traditional set of our instruments, but also we've virtualized all the instrumentation and the applications as well. And it bleeds into other questions or other opportunities with big data in terms of making it really more cost effective to gain visibility and intelligence to more of the network. It's much cheaper with a virtualized solution, and then you can get more pervasive visibility that way. So it's actually, a win-win.
Yeah, so let's talk about virtualization and the topic at hand, big data. So maybe go a little further and then we'll go down the line. But John, starting with you, so you're basically saying the probing becomes a little more flexible, maybe a little more cost effective, a little more under the control of the operator in terms of finding out where they need to instrument and look at some things. And that's going to return better data, quicker data, more cost effective? What's sort of the benefit in the big telco, the data side of this, right?
Yeah, so I made the argument earlier that providing more visibility is going to give you the benefit, first of all, if you're implementing new virtualized components, network functions, if you're implementing services on new VNFs, then from the get-go, you want to maintain service quality. You don't want customers to vote with their feet, as the gentleman said. And by providing that visibility, you can see if you have misbehaving VNFs or the physical elements that are interacting with them. But at the same time, you're gaining greater resolution, greater visibility to what the subscriber is doing, where, what, and what is their experience on the network, both on your physical and virtual. And you can compare, as you're rolling out virtualized instantations, are you achieving, kind of like a control function, are you achieving that same level of service that you had prior to the virtualization?
So Alex, I think your talk was very interesting in terms of tying new DevOps processes to the big data question, right? So same question, new computer architecture, new information architecture approaches, how does that impact big data? Maybe give us some examples as well, if you could, in terms of TELUS.
So in an old world where you didn't have NFV and virtualization at your disposal, you'd have to make hard decisions well in advance about what hardware you needed, and then you'd have to work around those decisions that you had made. In a new world where it's fairly easy to spin up a new VM to enable any kind of data analytics layer that you want to, you're able to make a real trade-off between, is it worth the effort to be able to refine my data so I can save on some storage costs, or should I just throw more money at more hardware to be able to backfill the VMs that I'm eating up? And like John's saying, a lot of the time, like, it's not cut and dried that it's one way or the other, but I think that the fact that you're in a virtual environment, you have much more easy access to the hardware, lets you make those trade-off decisions in real practical terms, instead of having to think 6 months ahead and saying, well, the hardware's going to arrive in about a month, and then I've got to install it and everything like that. You got to plan, and you got to oversize everything. So it really delivers a lot of advantages.
Yeah, and that's more on the data side, the data management side, right? So when you're looking at the data management side, the data processing side, we're also talking about more virtualized network, right? Which can then respond to the. So how does the virtualization of the network tie into what you just described? Either enabling it, enabling that more agile environment, or maybe it's a cost issue, right?
Yeah, so having access to more information about what's really going on in the network lets you decide where and when and how much to virtualize and which one to virtualize first, and to be able to get that information. So it's a bit of a virtuous cycle as well, because the more that you virtualize, the easier it is to get access into meta information about the network itself,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Joe, so maybe tackle that question as well. What's the value? So how are you guys going to be using this?
Yeah, I was going to even take a step back.
Yeah.
Tamara Cable was having a lot of issues even discovering what was on the network, network discovery tools. So that, even before you do the virtualization part, you got to understand what you may want to virtualize. So we had multiple years, lots of network discovery tools were being utilized for different aspects of the system, lots of analytics and quasi big data analysis to look at all the data that was being produced so that you could possibly virtualize. And so there was a lot of interesting discoveries. Some activities, even though it was kind of aimed at virtualization, it was, a lot of things were just found off right off the bat that we could implement this and it would save, lots of money. Or we don't need to, why are we alarming all these things that nobody takes action on? So there was a lot of good findings even from that perspective, from using these types of tools and doing the analysis, that were just a byproduct of leading toward a virtualization, but eventually saved us, tremendous amount of money in terms of, not alarming, not eyes on glass, not looking at things and taking action on it, so.
Yeah, so it seems like 5 minutes. Yeah, exactly. So we have a bit of time. Questions from the audience? Be happy to take some. Yeah. Peter?
What's your view on open source's role in virtualization? There's an awful lot of open source tools that are actually out there, and we see telcos are kind of moving towards that. We see initiatives like Open Mano and Open NFV actually coming along there. Interested to get the views of the panel on where that's going to end up.
Anybody want to jump in?
I mean,
don't
I
have
guess the best I can do on that is I'll echo the sentiment that open source seems to be driving the ecosystem quite a bit, that they seem to be at the fore of a lot of the developments in NFV and virtualization and so on. Does that mean that we as a telco have to make a cut and dry decision in terms of the approach that we're going to take? Not necessarily, but it means that we have to be aware of what's going on in that open source space if it's driving the ecosystem.
We're supporting the different flavors today. We have to, because this hasn't crystallized. It hasn't solidified, between VHS and beta, whatever. So, we're in that position where we have to be agnostic, and that's our strategy.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting ecosystem dynamics, though, as well, with operators contributing back into the community, right? I think that needs to very much happen, right?
It is.
For this to fulfill what telcos want out of it. Yeah. Any questions?
Since the nature of a virtualized network or virtualized operations are pretty much on demand, to make your slices on demand for whatever purposes and so forth, is there any, and if there is, what are those use cases that you actually need big data for to manage network, or is it more about small data or fast data analytics, which is working in real time?
Well, I think you answered the question in the question. It's based on demand. So the question is, what do you mean by demand, right? If demand means, what are the? No, should I spin up a new VM for my network policy box? What's the impetus for me to do that? Is it just because I'm watching capacity? Yes, but it's also because maybe there's some sort of customer demand, right, for a function that a PCRF is providing. So maybe a new slice needs to be stood up because there is latency concerns that are customer driven and so on. So if you think about the demand being driven by the customer and so on, well, that's complicated. Understanding what customers want and being able to figure that out in real time, that gets into big data realm, right?
You want to follow up? You okay?
Yeah, just that the question is more about, is there any big data use cases or so? And by big data, I probably imply a use case which is more sort of action and not a real time.
I don't, we're getting into what's real time versus not. It's possible that you might want to stand up a new network slice based a little bit on trending, so maybe you don't have to be completely real time about how you do it. But I'm squeezing in answers in between timelines, right? Like, is it a day? Is it an hour? Is it a minute? Is it a second? What's real time for you?
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, well, I'd like to thank our panel very much. Great discussion. Thanks.
Here today to tell you a little bit about some work we've been doing with some of the North American telco companies in terms of making sense of the vast volumes of data that we see in these big data environments and using location intelligence as a tool to really reduce the complexity of that data and start to gain insights from it. So some of you may be wondering why Pitney Bowes is at an event that's about telco data analytics. So here's my 1-minute explanation of that, which is Pitney Bowes obviously has a greater than 90-year history as a mailing company, starting with postage meters. But over more recent times, they have actually been moving into digital spaces, into e-commerce, and into software. So since the year 2000, they've actually acquired over 80 different companies, and I came from one of those acquisition companies, MapInfo. Another significant acquisition was Group 1 Software. So these are where the location intelligence components that Pitney Bowes owns came from. So we have a 30-plus year history as software companies that were acquired. Some of the things that we have traditionally done in the location intelligence space are for wireless telecommunications companies are things like being able to accurately locate customer addresses, be able to look at retail store locations, doing site selection, being able to look at network coverage data and visualize that both through our own tools and also through partner products. Some of you may be familiar with InfoVista's Planet product, which is actually based on our spatial technology. So when we get into the big data world and we're thinking about sensors, there are three elements that all of the data points have in common. There is a time component, a location component, and also a connectivity component. So in terms of how we're using that location component to reduce the complexity is to save time by allowing us to easily integrate a different variety of data sets by using the spatial aspect as a common element to tie things together. We're also able to use some of those software assets that I talked about in terms of our historical focus, in terms of data quality, in terms of precision of our geocoding data, and also in terms of being able to visualize network results, so predictive modeling at an extremely high resolution using high resolution raster formats. The business problem that we're trying to solve is that with all of these big data environments collecting these vast volumes of data, it's very difficult to gain insight from that data because it's complex, it's hard to see patterns, it's hard to understand what you're looking at. And why does that matter? Well, obviously, we've heard a lot of people today talking about one of the key issues is customer churn. If you can solve the problem of customer churn, then obviously you can make more money as a company. So when you start thinking about the reasons why customer churn, obviously network performance is a key reason why customers churn. And that is essentially a spatial problem and always has been a spatial problem. What's new is that in the big data environment, we no longer have to rely on the predictive modeling tools to predict where we may or may not get coverage indoor, outdoor for the different network types. Instead, we can actually take information about real customer experience on any given device and then use that as the basis of producing a customer verified coverage map, which gives us sort of the ground truth of what's really happening out there. So, as I mentioned, the reason why we want to understand all of the data that we're seeing is that we need to understand not just where the coverage is good and bad, but what that means in terms of real people, where real people live, where real people work, where real people go out, and also the commuting routes, the connectivity that you might get along a road network, and so the context of all those additional data sets. Solving this problem helps any number of different departments within the wireless telecommunications companies. It helps improve quality of service. It can help with net promoter scores. It can reduce churn. And it can also help with customer acquisition. So in terms of the actual solution that we produced, we're using really a centralized data lake, a spatial data lake, where we are able to then spatially aggregate data, actual subscriber data, and use these small geographies to spatially bin any call records and then be able to start looking at and visualize patterns in that data. I'll show you an example of what I mean by that. So we have all of these different data sources coming in to provide the view of the network. They're collected at different resolutions. We have very accurate data coming from our probes, but we also have less accurate data. And we need to be able to collect and preserve something that tells us about the resolution at which that data was collected, so that when we're using it down the line, we don't lose that data integrity. If you think about real subscriber data, if we take a look at Paris and we start looking over time, initially you might start with a map where you can see some kind of pattern in the transactions that are taking place. You might be able to pick out road networks in terms of where people are traveling. At certain times of day, you might be able to see people moving into offices or going home for the evening. But as you start to try and understand, over a period of, say, 90 days, what's going on, the data sets just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you start to be able to really lose any kind of pattern in the data. You can't see the wood for the trees. So how we can help with that kind of problem is by using an approach which is using a hexagon-based grid, and it's a hierarchical grid, so we can collect those different resolutions of data. we can take all of those points on the network where calls were made, whether they were drop calls, whether they were successful calls. We can understand what devices people were using. And we can start to then say, within any small cell on the network, was the coverage good? Was it bad? What was the actual verified customer experience as opposed to the modeled experience that we got from the RF planning tools? We take these grid cells and we take each call record and then we assign essentially a hexagon ID to those call records so that we can do that spatial binning process, and that all takes place in Hadoop using Spark or MapReduce. The next piece of that is then how do we add additional spatial context or other data sets to that to enhance them? Well, we can take that same hex ID approach and we can assign this common hex ID to any kind of data set that we like. So those could be data sets that Pitney Bowes provides, things like demographics, points of interest, business locations, road networks, but it could also be any kind of third-party data or data that the customer owns. So if you look at all of these different layers of data combined together, that's where we really start to be able to answer some of these questions in terms of, how do we optimize the network? How do we monetize these data assets that these companies are producing? How do we help them acquire customers? And how do we make use of other things like telematic data? So the solutions that we've produced are able to aggregate billions of records over a short time period, less than an hour, into these hexagon networks, and then we were able to either use logic in the spatial processing to do something with those results in a sort of operational process, or they can be displayed in terms of maps so that someone can actually visualize the results, and data scientists can take a look and work out what aspects they want to dig in further. So this is the kind of map that we produce when we're visualizing the results. So there are kind of extra post-processing steps where we look at things like where there might be water bodies. We don't want to report whether the coverage was good or bad in areas where we don't believe people were. We also can then get information about an individual cell just by hovering over it, and we can color code these maps according to different criteria from the data. If we take that one step further, we can use different kinds of boundary data to then look in more detail. So for example, if we're looking at a property or building-centric approach, we might take the actual parcel boundary data. So we might take the outline of a certain chain of stores. We might look at where somebody is within a building versus in a parking lot. And we can distinguish the coverage in those different places. This can also be used for other kinds of application like geofencing. So another way of looking at the data is rather than taking that property-centric approach and working out whether somebody has entered or left a building and what their experience was within that building, we can look at individuals, or we can look at aggregated sets of individuals to work out things like start and end points for journeys, and then associate that with other demographic profiles or information about certain kinds of subscribers. And then that can be used to help personalize customer experience, and also then leading on to data monetization. In terms of the traditional network planning tools and network optimization, obviously it's useful to be able to compare the data that you got from the predictive model versus the real-world model. That can help you not just with the customer experience when you're in the store trying to sell a phone to someone, what is going to be their real experience on the network versus what might be predicted. I think it's far more compelling to hear that 100 other people in these locations where you live, work, and play all had good experience on the network versus maybe a modeled claim or a predictive claim that you don't know what the basis for that would be other than a physics equation. So those kinds of things provide some kind of marketing edge to companies providing that information to their customers, and also it allows the salespeople to be able to have that degree of confidence. in terms of monetizing those data insights, once you get into looking at where do the customers live, work, play, where do they commute, where do they go, what times of day, you're really then starting to build data sets that could be sold on to other kinds of company for other kinds of new products. Final thing to tell you about is the use of geofences. So we saw earlier in the store location example, we could work out whether somebody was within a building, whether they were in a parking lot. We can extend that further to do things like look at drive distances through our routing capabilities. So we can combine information about admin boundaries, about drive distances, about customer locations, about store locations, competitor locations. You can start creating these very complex geofences, which you can then use for other aspects of data monetization, things like ad tech. So it's a very brief well through some of the things that we do at Pitney Bowes, and we're very interested to talk to people. The tools that we produce are designed both for end customers and also for us to partner with other people within this ecosystem. Location intelligence obviously is typically one part of a bigger problem. So we're looking at any kinds of opportunities to have interesting conversations. Thanks.
Thank you for joining our panel today on mobile location analytics, a game changer for marketers and operators. I'm Lisa Peterson. I am 3 days into my new role at Teralytics. Very excited to be here. I grabbed the opportunity to come and participate in the Telco Data Analytics event. Teralytics is a Zurich-based company working with operators globally to derive meaningful information from the data. Oh. Should I start over?
You can go. I just want to give everybody.
Okay.
You're all good. Lisa.
All right. Hey, this is my third day. You're making me nervous.
Yeah, I'm messing up your third day. I'm going to leave it like that.
All right, so let me start over here. I love this space. I'm just going to start like that because I was introduced to mobile location back in my early days at Sprint Nextel, where we launched GPS navigation. And from there, I went into the area of location-based advertising, which definitely has matured over the number of years since the early 2000s when it actually was getting started. I spent some time at Neustar, a big data analytics company, where we were taking our offline consumer information and data sets and making those actionable online for online targeting. And then mobile came, and just like everyone else who was in that online space, in advertising in the online world, had to learn a new method, right? No more cookies on mobile. So at Neustar, I set up their cross-device identity program. And then from there, I went to Tata. And what was really interesting is the presentation from Comptel today about sponsored data. And I really think all of this goes hand in hand. At Tata, I spent some time developing their global data exchange model for sponsored data. So anyway, this all kind of hangs together. Teralytics is in the business of helping operators make sense out of their data, so marketers and advertisers can tap into that data to create better, more relevant experience for their customers. And for the operators, of course, there's the benefit of the new revenue stream. So, with that, we're going to talk today and dig into that a little bit more about how that actually really works. And we have some representatives here today from carriers as well as a cable company. And then we have our privacy expert here at the end. And I'm just going to let them go ahead and introduce themselves.
Okay. My name is Brooke Bobe. I work for Pinsight Media. We're a wholly owned subsidiary from Sprint, and we focus on the monetization of data, advertising, and distribution or user acquisition.
My name is Suresh. I'm from TELUS, and my team, I'm in the team of messaging and value-added services.
Hi, I'm Joe Arsenault again. I still work for Time Warner Cable, and I haven't been laid off or offered a package in the last half an hour. So.
Excellent.
It's like this was on the panel before.
You're right. I'm the privacy expert at the end. I'm Colin O'Malley, and I am the founder and principal of a consulting group called the Lucid Privacy Group. We help technology companies and ad tech companies manage their privacy practices and positioning on these privacy issues. I'm also the founder and CEO of a content curation company called Plow. That's PLOW.io. And I'm a product technologist by background. Have just been building products in this privacy space for 10 to 15 years now. So prior to these roles, I led product development and partnerships at a privacy certification company called Trustee, and I co-founded a company called Avidon, now Ghostery, which was the first company to serve the ad choices icons at scale as an independent provider and the operator of the Ghostery browser extension that shows you who's tracking you around the web.
Thank you. All right, so now let's dig into this. So for a long time, so going back to even the days of roaming, I actually had roaming experience too, where we would talk about, I go into a country and the device connects to an HLR and I get a marketing message about the country that I just entered. So we've been talking about location-aware marketing for a long time. So I would just like to really understand now, the panelists, where do you believe we are, I guess, on the maturity curve when we talk about location-based marketing and advertising? Are we really nailing it and have these problems solved, or are we still in our infancy? I guess, what would your opinion be on that?
I think we still have a ways to go. We hear a lot of buzz about real time versus right time, and we're definitely on the side of the fence of right time. So, a lot of people have this conception that you're driving by McDonald's and want this pop-up ad coupon or something like that, and I don't think that's true. First of all, if you're driving, I hope you don't have your apps open. And second of all, I just don't think it's appropriate and that you're gonna act on it that quickly. But if you look at the location data and the patterns overall, I think that you can deliver insights and you can find those great mobile moments to deliver an ad in the right contextual time.
Right. So, echoing Brooke's point, it's slower than anticipated. Main reason is the problem with ever-growing data being data. As a carrier, how do we handle this data explosion? How do you store this? How do you find the necessary information needed to certainly target a one customer approach, right? And funny that you mentioned about roaming. So as you mentioned, initially you probably have to call in and say, hey, I'm going for this country, can you add this package for me, right? I guess nowadays the carriers, what they're doing is, soon as you land in a country, they would say, hey, you landed in this country and these are the popular packages that's available for you if you want to go buy it, right? So that's I guess, again, going back to slower than anticipated. I think it is happening, but it's on slower paces.
So when you say, so just back to that, I want to tease that out a little bit more. So in terms of maturity, it seems that maybe some carriers are thinking first of how to use this for their own marketing purposes.
Exactly.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Before you then expose it out to other marketers and advertisers. Interesting. Any other thoughts here? I know you're not carriers, but.
I'll just add that in the digital media space, folks have been using location for quite some time now. We know there's an appetite for it in the space. There's a happy coincidence, though. We were talking about this classic use case of going by Starbucks. It's, by the way, as an aside, it's so funny. I'm a New Yorker, and it never occurred to me that you'd be driving by the Starbucks. I always thought you'd be walking by the Starbucks, because it didn't have the safety issue. That's right. You could trip. That's true. But there's a happy coincidence in alignment between a lot of the issues that the privacy folks are concerned about and this sort of awesome marketing audience of one problem, right? Mm-hmm. Where and hopefully, I think it'll play out similarly once carriers are using their location data as well to power the mobile ad space. Those audiences of one are just really impractical. Right? You sort of have to roll it up to a level of audience that is interesting to a marketer, and that happens to coincide with increases in target range that take us out of this precise targeting danger zone where the FTC is asking for opt-in consent and all these other rules and regulations are coming into effect, and into a much safer space with location.
So, I mean, in the early days of mobile marketing and advertising, that's all that was talked about, mobile as the most powerful channel for that one-to-one communication. And then I think what happened is there was this realization that, well, advertisers really want as many eyeballs as possible. So are we really just going back to what's needed is audience data at scale versus is there a trade-off between scale and precision? Do you need both? Is it use case dependent? Just trying to understand.
Okay, so from my perspective, I would say that it's use case specific. I think one of the great things that carriers bring to the table are these rich data insights. And I'm definitely on the opt-in side, by the way, the argument. But anyway, there are use cases where someone will come to us and ask for something very, very specific. And we do have to go into audience extensions and do some lookalike modeling to try to get that. There is some sacrifice to precision, but I think in certain use cases, that's okay, that works. And then there are other use cases where you really do need to be more specific to your audience.
Yeah, and I was going to bring up that, Time Warner Cable has a lot of commercial Wi-Fi hotspots that we deployed. So from that perspective, like in a venue arena where it's in a basketball arena or whatever, that there could be very targeted advertisements to pitching tickets for the game or pitching tickets for the next game if you once you're logging in and utilizing the Wi-Fi. So that's one venue, and then more the sort of the mom and pop sort of where they're getting their Wi-Fi or getting their services from us as a play, and then they're getting a Wi-Fi hotspot on top of that to extend services for limited range. That could be uber tailored just for that business in terms of what you provide for that context, or for businesses around that in let's say in a mall situation. So I think we're seeing a little bit of both. We're helping on certain areas, but a lot of that play is actually being done by the actual providers themselves, providing putting that content up and making that available to their customers.
So is that so have you talked about then exposing that data to other buyers, such as a Sprint Pinsight? Because obviously Sprint sees everything maybe on their network, but what happens when the person leaves and goes to Wi-Fi? So I guess what I'm leading into, is there a collaborative type model that's
there
needed
is some
here?
sharing with some of the carriers and telcos in terms of sharing that data or quote unquote selling that data to be able to provide them that experience to say that we're used to be called the Time Warner Cable Arena in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now it's the new Charter Arena. That there's obviously going to be a lot of people, Sprint, AT&T Wireless, that are using that service from a Wi-Fi perspective, and obviously be able to spin that back to them and say that these people are coming to use your services. There's a lot of Sprint customers that maybe are going to this arena and buying whatever, or utilizing the services being provided at the arena. That can be spun back and give to them in terms of just from a utilization perspective.
So I want to come back to that in a minute here. So we've seen on the mobile advertising side, Google, Facebook, obviously, are getting a huge lion's share of the mobile advertising revenue. Operators are starting now to come in, and it's a little different because of the way you're regulated, right? I guess fast forward 3 to 5 years from now, are we going to be living in a different world where in order for the operators to start to insert themselves back into that value chain, there is more collaboration that might need to happen, or maybe what you're talking about, audience extensions, can help solve some of those problems, the scale. I'm going back to scale and precision.
Okay, from my perspective, I would say that there's definitely, when we're trying to work with other carriers, there's always complexity in how the data work, how is it protected, just trying to get these different large organizations to work together and figure out a way to do that easily. I'm not going to minimize and say that's not complicated, it is. But I do think that there's a great opportunity for it to be very impactful for us to work together for the audience extension use cases, because clearly when it comes to our Sprint subscriber base or another carrier subscriber base, we're going to be the experts on that subscriber base and know the most about our customers. But if we're going for scale, partnerships make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree with you as well, because like if you mentioned Google and Facebook, so those, because they are the big guys and they pretty much go on your IP address based on cookies to look at where you at, what kind of things you are looking at and target audience and give you specific marketing. Whereas for the mobile operators, based on LBS or the GPS is the only anchoring point, right? So the only way that as a carrier to compete with those big boys is to collaborate with all the carriers together or come up with another aggregator where he provide the service so that these carriers can tap in and use that.
So 3 to 5 years now, we're going to see that? How long?
With all the red tapes, I don't think it will be happening in 3 to 5 years. But I think it should happen, and I would want this to happen. Yeah.
What are, let's just talk about, I guess, more pragmatic too, like the monetization, some of the revenue opportunities. Mm-hmm. So what types of vertical buyers are in need of this type of data? What are you seeing from a Pinsight media perspective? Brooke is interesting because she has both hats on, the Sprint and the media side, right?
Yeah, my background was I came out of Sprint product development and then moved over to work at Pinsight, fully immersed in advertising. So that's my background. And specifically in Pinsight, I didn't say this, but I'm really on the sales side. So I do all of our programmatic partnerships. I work with our media agencies and brands, and then I also work with the publishers, so both on the supply and demand side. Yeah.
So back to the verticals.
The verticals.
So let's talk about it from an advertiser perspective. So Pinsight has mobile location data, you have behavioral data, CRM data sets, right?
Yeah, so we can really support about any vertical, and we get those requests. I think that retail is great. Automotive, financial, those are all verticals that we're very strong in. I love some of our conquesting use cases. They're some of my favorites. Getting to work with the end customer and seeing like the surprise and delight on their face when we show them. A lot of times they'll come to us and tell us, hey, we have our user base is males between 30 and 50. And it's like, let's see. And so we can actually pull the data set and show them, here's actually who's your customer, here's actually who's very interested in your brand, and then here is who's interested in your top competitor's brand. And it's just so incredibly different on mobile, the richness of the data, different places different location insights that you can pull from them, different content, different apps that they're interested in, different mobile web behaviors. And those are just such interesting to a brand, and then how we're going to go and take those insights and apply it to a media campaign to target like that right audience for them. We worked with a large wing brand where we recently had this happen, and their customers were, big consumers shopped at Target, and their biggest competitor, their consumers shopped at Walmart, and their profiles looked quite different, but they were blown away by the insights that we were able to share with them, and then like the media campaign that came with that.
About the privacy differences for some of these use cases that you're talking about. We heard from Verizon yesterday about some of the use cases being opt-in, some are opt-out, and some are, if in aggregate, no opt-in, or I guess if you could maybe explain to the audience
Sure.
the variations of those use cases.
So when Pinsight Media was formed, we really spent a ton of time thinking about privacy. We put a lot of effort into it. And so in the US market specifically, half the carriers have an opt-in policy. We're very proud to say that we are the first carrier to come out with an opt-in privacy for behavior targeting specifically. And so it's not you're standing at the checkout counter, everything's pre-populated, and you push the red button. It's not like that for us. So you have to make a very conscious effort that you are checking the box, allowing us to do behavioral targeting. So that's that one piece of it. The second piece of it is our opt-out policy, and that's for when we use aggregated data on a larger level for kind of analytics type use cases. With our opt-out, so everybody is, I'm sorry, I think I said that wrong. Everyone is opted into the program, and then if you, we send a reminder frequently if you want to opt out anytime, that's fine. And then with our other behavioral targeting, you actually have to explicitly opt into the program.
And Colin, given your experience in working with the FCC and the FTC, where do you think all of this is going to head in your perspective in the U.S. market? Let's talk about that first.
Right. So I think it's useful to take a step back as well and to reflect on where this market has gone over the last 10 years on privacy and regulation and as a prism for looking at the current moment. 10 or 15 years ago, carriers were first really exploring putting a lot of its data out into the digital media advertising ecosystem. And so a lot of those experiments didn't go as planned. Carriers were leveraging startups in the ad tech space like NebuAd and Inform, et cetera. I don't know, I'm getting some nods out there. I'm not sure how familiar folks around the room with that experience. But it was a real challenging one, and those companies either went out of business or weren't able to operate at scale in the U.S. And there were a lot of lessons learned that the market also took from that experiment. One of the most important was that there was a tremendous amount of concern among the press and folks in Congress, unsure how much that actually was felt in the consumer blocks that they were representing, but certainly the consumers' advocates through the representatives were expressing concern about what they call deep packet inspection, like a comprehensive view into all of the traffic that in this case really an ISP would have into traffic. So when we look at carriers now and how they're looking at translating a lot of that data to online, one of the things that they're looking at is ways to ensure that they can summarize web traffic and can provide insights that are gathered from traffic without revealing, the fire hose to the marketing community. When you look at at rules of the road that are affecting this space right now, you of course have the FCC and the proposed rules that are on the table that would have would force effectively all carriers to follow the sprint model of going the opt-in route. A lot of people are reading tea leaves on that. It's really difficult to forecast at this stage. It's really clear that Commissioner Wheeler is very serious about his opt-in proposal. And despite all sorts of lobbying conversations that are going back and forth, we're not sort of picking up any inclination right now that a concession on Commissioner Wheeler's part is forthcoming. And that brings up all sorts of other issues. We're talking about Google and Facebook and how we compete as a market against those providers. And we could get into, I think, a pretty robust conversation about the fairness, the objective fairness of carriers being subjected to one rule and a set of huge, dominant, what I would consider to be utility class technology providers not having to play by those same rules and sort of where that will all go. If the FCC rules come into being as a matter of law, as many predict that they will, then it will have a market tilting impact. There's no question. I think a lot of people on the privacy side would say that that's unfortunate for the carriers, but it's a result of the FCC having jurisdiction over this market and the FTC not. So in terms of where that will go over the next 3 to 5 years, I think you're going to see also the FTC begin to press deeper into the online media space, and you're already seeing some indications of that.
Thank you very much for explaining that, because I learned something too. So again, 3 days into the job. It is interesting that the Wi-Fi is not as regulated, anything that's carried over Wi-Fi, right? So then I'm going to jump to how do we connect the dots, because everyone is talking about you have to connect the journey of the user. Some of it's a little more regulated than others. How is Sprint looking at cross-device, cross-channel type use cases, or are you looking more at the mobile specific? And then I want to also hear from Time Warner about the applicability of the mobile audience data for addressable TV and cable TV advertising. So maybe if you could take the first. Are you looking at those cross-device?
So I'll speak from the Pinsight perspective specifically. So we also have a publisher business. So within Pinsight, we do some app development. We support third-party apps. We work with startups to develop apps for them. So we see a much broader perspective than just the Sprint data set, including international. So we do have these variety of data sets, a variety of channels. Cross-channel is something that we're thinking about a little bit. Again, this is a Pinsight-specific answer. It's a little bit down the road for us in terms of roadmap, where it fits on our roadmap, but it is something we're thinking about. But when somebody approaches us from an advertising or media perspective, our real strength is obviously mobile.
Thank you. And then what about you?
Yeah, so it's interesting for some of our devices. If you're using Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi in your home or on a TWC hotspot, then you have certain capabilities, let's say to watch TV channels or DVR programming and such like that. So it's interesting that a play could be made to say that if TWC links up with Sprint and you're a Sprint device and you're using Sprint, then maybe you have that extendability to watch more extended programming or your own DVR programs on that device because there's an arrangement with them, whether you're on Wi-Fi or not on Wi-Fi. So I think that could be a play that I don't know if specifically has been explored yet, but that could be a play from that perspective, that there's some agreement to allow that usability. And again, I think we actually take a step back, and I brought this up at some other event, that Wi-Fi hotspots were a big issue from us, and I brought this up in the panel about automation. We were a big scale of automation, and some of the issues we had customers and people expecting Wi-Fi hotspots to be available 24/7, right? And then, whether you were in the business or outside the business. And what we found is a lot of businesses were turning them off. When they went home at night, they turned them off, and people were expecting that availability in that venue or that location, and was being turned off. And obviously, that from an operational perspective impacted us for that, we were getting probe sensors saying, this Wi-Fi hotspot is offline, so take action. What do we do to fix it? And generating automated ticket volume, and obviously people getting in the loop. So there's a cost there too in terms of how do you support an infrastructure, these types of activities, just from the operational perspective, if you're deploying more Wi-Fi hotspots or other capability to support advertising.
So monetization model for the Wi-Fi hotspots.
Correct.
But going back to the cross-device linkage, so it could be that I'm on my mobile device, I'm looking up destination vacations through a mobile app, TripAdvisor, whatever. And then I go and I see that commercial on TV.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're already seeing plays like that too, that, the what's the app? Shazam?
Shazam, yeah.
And what?
There's one, Shazam.
Yeah. So that app, in terms of you see it on the TV, and you can take, if you point the phone at the icon or whatever like that, it would automatically know that that's the type of ad you want to look to, and you can get more information from that. So we're already seeing the capabilities, and obviously the cross support capabilities up and down the chain from a phone to a device and all of that. And I could see, again, with the linkages to carriers, how do you would Sprint optimize somehow the phone experience for Time Warner Cable to make it a better, to make it a better play, and then there could be a linkage there. We're not like AT&T or Verizon where we offer some of those services across the board.
I'm all about bringing people together here on this panel. So back to TELUS, since you have the TV side too, and I know you're just thinking about this and you're going through these considerations yourself. I guess what will it take to accelerate the thought process there at TELUS?
Yeah, so it's again going back to the big data analytics tool to find out where this user is, what was he or she is using, and how can we expose the new service on the TELUS TV, which is one of the biggest one in Canada.
What other challenges do you face? So if maybe you would be advising Suresh here on the process that Sprint went through and thinking and evaluating, what would your advice be on how to go about this?
There are some challenges. So when Pinsight Media was formed, we did a small acquisition. So I'd say that, and then clearly we saw other acquisitions happen in the marketplace. But there's a big shift from just even the vernacular that is used by carriers versus all the vernacular that is used in the advertising ecosystem. There's a lot of different tech, all the programmatic, how are you going to protect your data? There's so many things to consider. And then just the sheer volume of processing. I mean, we process double-digit terabytes of data per day, clean it, organize it, and draw insights from it. That's taken us several years to get to the point that we are now, and it wasn't an easy journey. And then, making all the build in-house versus buy decisions, those are complicated things, and I would say, look to someone who's, done it or been down that path before you try it on your own, because I know even in the ad tech space, I've talked to several, very reputable people that have gone out and tried to build exchanges and things like that and failed at their first attempt. So I'd say seek counsel from some folks that have done it and help you make those decisions.
Okay. I think we have 5 minutes left because I see the sign back there, and I want to make sure we're getting the audience to participate. If you have any questions for any of the panelists, does anyone want to ask a question? Is this too scary of a topic?
Too scary of a panel.
Too scary of a panel. Well, okay, let me just go back here and ask this question because I thought the sponsored data was interesting. It did have an interesting linkage. So is there some kind of give to get model that we expect to develop around I get something in return for sharing my data from a consumer perspective?
So,
are we going to see that model develop in the next few months, few years?
I think you're already seeing it. So I know that we've done some experimentation in terms of if we're offering an incentive to get opt-ins, it works to certain groups of users. That would never really work for me personally, but there are definitely a certain percentage of consumers that are going to be interested in that and definitely go into this opt-in program for some kind of return of advanced features or something along those lines. And then I would say that you are also starting to see models where you opt into some advertising program and then you get $5 off your bill or something along those lines. Those are definitely out there. And you see it in games also, right? You want to get a free Pokemon or something, you watch a small video and then you get additional points. So,
yeah, I think the give to get issue is also kind of problematic for some multi-threaded activities that, if we give, if we're going to give data to Burger King, we also have to give it to McDonald's. Or if you give it to Burger King, McDonald's won't take it either, or something like that. There may be some scenarios where we can't share it across across an industry, let's say, or a package like that.
Are you talking from an enterprise perspective?
Yeah, I'm thinking of an enterprise that there may be arenas that, and we've kind of seen that we won't sell to one person because we don't sell to this person, or vice versa, up or down the chain. So we've seen those kinds of activities where the groups, there's issues of sharing in terms of who you're going to share. And I like overall the concept of that integrator, the sponsored data, but then the actual how it threads apart, up or down the chain can be issues.
Colin, from a consumer perspective, going back to sponsored data, I mean, it is kind of tying hand in hand, again, with the FCC activity there.
Right. Yeah, I think we definitely will see some give-to-get models out there. And I think that one of the reasons is because of the FCC pressure and other forces that are already beginning to make it look like it may be inevitable that this goes opt-in at some point, and people start following, Sprint's trail on the opt-in side. Once you have that as a market requirement, then that's going to mean that people are going to have to be a lot more creative to try to pump the volume, because as you know, it's hard to get critical mass on an opt-in basis. Commissioner Wheeler has already been publicly, he's issued some public statements that indicate that he's pretty nervous about these pay-to-play or these subsidized models based on privacy. And I think the industry just needs to be really careful about making it seem like a fun sort of gamified sort of experience, and resist any model that can be presented by the advocates or others as what becomes some kind of class system where folks that can't afford it have to sacrifice personal privacy in order to get access. Yep. If we can resist that kind of caricature of the pricing models, then I think that we'll be fine.
Okay, well, I think we are being called off the stage, so thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, I think everyone will be around here for a little bit. Great. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Thank you. I've been traveling a bit, packed on a few pounds, get home, the wife's bought me a brand new Fitbit, right? 10,000 steps a day, 5 miles, whatever it is, she's tracking me. I want to watch the game, all right? Especially tonight. I want to watch the game tonight. I'm not going to walk. Luckily, I have a really hyperactive Yorkshire Terrier and a Roomba. You let those two of them loose in a room and you clip that Fitbit onto his collar, those 10,000 steps are like. All right. So who are we? My name is Samir. With a company called Comtech. Our product's called Location Studio. Pleased to report that as of 5 minutes ago, we were selected as one of the top 3 industrial IoT platforms by CTIA. So that was just in time. So we're the #1 provider of precise location and geomessaging worldwide. If you ever dial 911 and had a location request done, it was likely our platform. And if you ever received an Amber Alert or any sort of geo message, that was likely our platform too. So that's what we do. ABI Research ranks us dominant in precise location-based services today. So about a year ago, the question was asked by a lot of our customers. You guys are great at getting location of mobile phones. How are you going to get location of 50 to 100 billion devices deployed worldwide, each with their own radios, their own proprietary protocols, right? Their own cloud services, their own transport mechanisms? How on earth are you going to do this? Because the next generation of emergency calls are not going to be made by people. They're going to be made by things, right? It's going to be the glass break sensor, right, that's calling the local police station. Or it's going to be the automatic crash notifications on cars. So we've set out to solve that problem where you don't know which device and how it's connected. Is it LTE? Is it Wi-Fi? Is it LoRa? Is it Sigfox? And how do you actually unite all of these into a location delivery system, right? So the solution we came across had to work with a sub-100 millisecond time to first fix, right? It could iterate and get more accurate as you go forward, but the first fix had to be sub-100 milliseconds. Now, how do you do this? And obviously, you've got to use every single positioning system that's available out there to get that fix, right? So we came up with what we believe is a novel architecture that I wanted to present to the community here. What we do is we free and open source a very small client. It's less than 1K in size. That can be loaded onto 95 to 98% of all the devices that are commercially available today. What it does is it takes a 20 millisecond snapshot of the RF environment that it sees, right? Packages it up, 128 bytes, shoots it over to our backend. And we do all of the calculation for location in the backend. And especially, let's take assisted GPS or AGNSS as an example, right? A cold start GPS chipset could take minutes to acquire its location, right? All we want is a 20 millisecond, sometimes an 80 millisecond snapshot of the actual satellites that the chipset sees. We operate our own reference networks so that we have a prediction of where these satellites are going to be, and we will converge it on the server side. We also operate our own Wi-Fi, cell ID databases. we make commercially available for free a SLAM engine that you can use to map your indoor spaces, and also a mapping engine that you could use to load your indoor spaces. So for us, it's about ubiquitous positioning. It's really, we've tried to ban the terms indoor and outdoor in our organization, although they do persist in the industry. And that's what we've basically launched. And here are some of the results that we've seen, and this was only using low power WAN. There was no GNSS, right? There was no Wi-Fi. It was just purely low power WAN. And you'll see that some of the best results are at a 90th percentile, better than 10 meters of accuracy. And this was presented to 3GPP about 6 months ago. Right. And so now we've located that dot, right, quickly and efficiently, hopefully. What do you do with it? So we've built a layer of value-added services on top. And this was an actual live demo that we actually ran at IoT World in Santa Clara, if you guys were there, about, I don't know, was it April? It was in May, right? Where we had fleets running around the Bay Area. And then people had themselves tagged. And as they walked into our booth, it would actually track them from wherever they were, from their car to the parking lot, and then transition seamlessly indoor. And you can see this if you come down, right? So, yeah, we're pretty jazzed about it. We've also added something called a cloud messaging center to this, because a lot of these devices need to communicate. And so they can communicate via MQTT, CoAP, any of the multiple protocols that are available out there. And we've integrated all of them into a back-end messaging service to provide a complete geo-messaging, geolocation, and mapping, navigation, all of the functions that you'd need in one space. And we call it Location Studio. If you do choose to upload your own maps for sensitive indoor environments or even sensitive outdoor environments, we provide key-based authentication of applications so that the right application can access it and not everything else out there. This is one of the sites that uses our location engine today. This is in Sweden. And if I could actually play the video, it will show you that it's a 30-minute, it's not a 30-minute video. It's a 30-minute SLAM that's happening in 3 dimensions. So it doesn't take very long at all for you to actually SLAM any of your enterprise locations. And I'm not going to go through this, but you'll see that there was an actual capture of the SLAM taking place. Okay, so what we've essentially made available at this conference is something that we've christened Location Studio, which is live now, where we've talked about the positioning suite, where how do you get location out of a car, a connected car, a mobile phone, landlines, and IoT devices that you have no clue. If you're buying from 20 different suppliers today, how do you unify them all to report location in a consistent format? And that's what Positioning Suite does. We've added something called GeoSuite, which does the geofencing. We actually curate OSM maps for the United States now, so that you can use OSM maps as a default, but you are welcome to use any of the premium map suppliers as well. They are also available through our platform. So if you're looking to reduce costs, use OSM for 99% of all mapping, and use premium suppliers where you feel that you absolutely need to. Right. messaging, and we're building up the analytics suite right now. Right now, it's just a visualization layer, so happy to work with any of the partners here to build up a more cogent analytics suite on top of it. And we now have solutions deployed across all of these verticals, either through partners or through direct customers. Okay, and these are the list of features. I'm not going to go through all of them here because I don't think we have time. But the key to take away is we can ingest almost any type of data into this platform. And once you use the location feature, we can display it in conjunction with any of these data. Just a few examples of the type of mapping that we've enabled. And today, trusted, curated OSM is available for North America, and it will be available worldwide by the end of the year that you can use. And you got a single box search, navigation, geofencing, asset tracking, and comparison against most of the providers out there that you can go take a look at for yourself. And we've been doing this for almost 25 years in the location space. We were primarily in the location determination space. And hopefully, as things go forward, we hope to add value to the industry. Right. So thank you. That was it. It was short and sweet. Go check us out at developer.location.studio. Sign up, get going. Your data is yours, right? We don't collect any data. We enable you to collect your own data, right? And we never see it if you don't choose to share it with us. All right. I think that's important to note. So thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions. Yeah.
So you mentioned, and I'm trying to understand if it's just the data collection piece or integration from another source, but we're on the landline side, more the grounds, I guess, here, but so location of landline, how does that technology work, or is it a component of this?
So we just pull from a database today.
Okay. But that gets some magic.
No, sorry.
On the client piece that you talked about,
Yeah.
so I'm curious, obviously IoT, there's devices that move frequently, there's devices that move rarely, it might be a toaster, it might be industrial, maybe you move it every now and then. What I couldn't tell from your presentation, do you have a dynamic frequency interval by which you're pulling and pushing, or what's the mechanism by which you're determining how frequently to take?
So we could, yeah, basically there is a timer on that you could enable in the client itself, right? So you could do a duty cycle of, one every 6 months if you want, in terms of a locate, right? Or you could do one every second, right? Right. Thank you. If there's no other questions.